This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose. Welcome to Well Worth It, a health and wellness podcast. My name is Morella Petrucci and I am your host. I am a wellness coach, vocalist, soulna, sound and energy healing practitioner, and sound healing facilitator. In 2015, at the age of 31, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a condition I was told might lead to a disability that had no cause or cure. I was given no hope of recovery. However, through countless hours of researching and choosing to take control back of my own health, I found different perspectives and found that this was simply not true. On this podcast, I will share what I have learned and implemented along the way for my health and wellness since my diagnosis that has kept me well and thriving. It is my mission to empower, inspire, and teach you how to play an active role in your health too. Investing in your own health and wellness is truly well worth it. I know this firsthand. So if you are someone who is experiencing symptoms, dealing with an unknown diagnosis, chronic illness, disease or condition, or you simply want to learn how you can get back in the driver's seat of your health, this is for you. It is my obligation to share with you that the information shared on this podcast is purely for educational purposes only. All information is based on my own personal experience and represents my opinion and the opinions of my guests. It is not intended to replace the necessary measures of your primary healthcare providers, therefore should not be taken as medical advice. Pam Bartha was clinically diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 28 and chose a non-prescription approach to therapy. Now over 30 years and still MS-free, she teaches others how to recover from disease by treating the parasites that cause disease while following a holistic approach. She is a health educator, speaker, coach, and the founder of the Live Disease Free Academy. And she is the author of Become a Wellness Champion. Pam has coached hundreds of students in over 15 countries in her Live Disease Free plan, and I am so grateful to say that I am one of them. I am a graduate of the Live Disease Free Academy, and I am so honored to be able to have this conversation in this episode with Pam. Let's dive in. Hello, Pam, and welcome to Well Worth It. It is so wonderful to have you on the show. It is truly an honor and a privilege to have this conversation with you.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Morella.
I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So to begin with, I'd like to really share about how I actually came across you and your story, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Beautiful. So in 2015, as you know, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it wasn't until 2 years into my journey that I actually started to question the path that I was heading down. And so at that point, I decided that I wanted to do some more research, and I really didn't understand what living with MS or even managing MS was at that point in time until I started getting more lesions in my brain. And the hospital and the specialist was saying to me that you needed to possibly look at taking another medication because the efficiency of the medication you were on wasn't the best, wasn't doing the best job. So it was at this point where I really felt uncomfortable with, the idea of taking a medication for the rest of my life. And so I decided that I wanted to do some more research and find what others were doing out in the world and what their success stories were. And so it was when I started doing this research that I came across your amazing book, which is Become a Wellness Champion. So I've got it right here with me if you're watching this on video. And I started reading your book and I instantly resonated with it, and it just made sense. Everything that you shared just made sense. And so firstly, I just wanted to say I am so grateful to have come across your book, and I'd like to thank you for sharing your story, because I think sometimes, we're very reserved with sharing our stories, and it's, only when we do share our stories that, you can actually impact other people's lives, and you have truly impacted my life in such a huge way. And I am truly so grateful for that. I'm actually getting goosebumps just having this conversation with you, because I remember, sitting in bed and feeling like there was no light at the end of the tunnel, and coming across your story and hearing, what you had discovered. And, you've been symptom free for 34 years. And um, just listening to what you went through really gave me hope. And yeah, I'm so, so grateful for that. And there's just so much more I'd like to share throughout this conversation, and, would let us to actually working together. And, I consider you a mentor and my health coach. And I'd really love for you to share, your story with everybody who is listening, because I think it is so empowering. And, you really empowered me to take control of my health. And again, I'm so
Oh,
grateful for that.
and it has been such a joy to work together. Like you're just amazing, and the successes you've had from your diligence. And it just really helps others to see that this is not something that just happens to me or you, but that anyone can, once you get the proper knowledge, it is so empowering and you can take your health and your life back. And so when I was just 28 years old, I had always been healthy. I just was raising children. I had two small kids under the age of 2. And I literally went from being a healthy person all my life to losing vision within 3 days in my left eye. And that was very scary. I had no idea what was going on, but I went to the eye specialist and I was quickly referred to the MS University Hospital Clinic on the West Coast in Canada. So it was like the best in Canada, because he suspected that it was multiple sclerosis, because it was like a complete blackout of optic neuritis. And so when I went there, I was scared, but I thought I was in good hands and I thought they were going to fix me because I'd never been sick. And I always thought, you go to your doctor, and that's my generation, and they fix you. And the expert there, I was also starting to get a little bit of tingling, and I had a little bit during my pregnancy too. This attack happened about 6 months after my second child. And so tingling and a little bit of weakness in my legs, terrible insomnia, terrible headaches. But the neurologist at that MS clinic, he said, just with all of the testing he did, he said, I'm sure you've got MS. And he said, we don't know what causes it, and there's nothing you can do to stop the progression. You're going to be completely disabled in time. You're going to be in a wheelchair. Sometimes people are disabled more quickly and sometimes more slowly. But as the expert, I'm telling you, people are going to tell you about all kinds of snake oil cures, but there's nothing that you can do to change the course of your life. You will be completely disabled with this disease. And I left his office and I was just like devastated. And I thought, how is this possible? How can you be healthy? Like, like really healthy, like for 28 years. And then all of a sudden this mysterious thing is taking over your body, and they don't know what it is. And so I was really devastated. I was scared. I got home, we went through a mountain pass and I was crying all the way home because I just thought what a burden I was going to be to my husband, and how was I going to raise my children? But my mom stepped in. Moms are great for that. And so she really helped me. And I was literally on the couch. I just felt so horrible. I was like, again, terrible headaches, fatigue. I was having a really strong flare. And then the optic neuritis was really severe. And all I had left was my faith in God. And God had answered my prayers many times in the past. And so I asked again, and I just begged and begged for help. And I didn't know how my life would go, or I didn't know that I would be doing this now, but I just had a sense that if I kept asking, that he always came through for me in the past. And so sure enough, very shortly after I started asking, my mother-in-law gave me one book. That's all I got, was one book, and that's a very classic book. It's called The Yeast Connection by Dr. William Crook. Don't buy it. It's really old. You can probably find it in a local library, but doctors 40 years ago, just a handful of them that I could find, they already knew that all chronic disease was stemming from infections in the body, but especially in the gut. And if you clear that up or restore balance, whatever the disease you're dealing with will stop and you'll have a lot of recovery. And I thought, well, that sounds a lot more promising than what the neurologist told me. So I decided at that point to take a different path. I decided not to follow standard of care. I decided to try to figure out something about these infections. And so I tried many different safe things. I've tried lots of integrative approaches, but the more I focused on working on my microbiome and correcting the microbes in like treating parasites and it started with candida, right? The candida craze like 40 years ago. And then we learned about the Lyme infections. And then more recently, we're really starting to understand the bigger parasites a lot more, like the protists are still small, but the worms, et cetera, too. So through all of that, it's been 35 years now, MS free. I had another child, and so I have 3 kids, but now I'll have 7 grandchildren in August, my 7th granddaughter, 6 girls and 1 boy, and they're all like under the age of 8. So it's super busy, it's super fun. And that's the thing, is that when you get this wisdom about the missing link of why we're so sick. Diet is important, exercise is important, healthy lifestyle is important. But if we don't know how to restore balance to the microbes that live in our body, that's really the missing link for sickness. And so by not perfectly doing that, but by doing that well enough, I have been able to live MS free for all these years. Since then, I went back to university. I got a science degree. I became a certified teacher. And all of that training really helped equip me to serve students. And we've served hundreds and hundreds of students all over the world, helping them to recover from chronic diseases. So I've developed a course, the Live Disease Free Plan, and it helps people to take responsibility for their health. And I think that's a really important thing now, is that we do need our experts and different integrative practitioners, but we should be in the driver's seat, and we really need to take charge of our health and take responsibility for our health, because that's the quickest way to reach our health goals.
Oh my goodness, Pam, I totally resonate with everything that you've said. And I think it's so common, firstly, to have that experience of, thinking that you're a healthy individual, and then, having this basically, they call it an attack on the body. And, for it in particular for multiple sclerosis, it presenting as optic neuritis, which is, inflammation of the optic nerve. And so, everything that you have shared, for me, I know when I came across your book, I wasn't ready to do a lot of the treating around pathogens and bacteria and that sort of thing. And so for me, I started with that natural approach, and, I started working with a naturopath, and I was the type of person that wanted to know what I was actually dealing with. So, I did the testing, and, I worked with the naturopath for 4 years, and we did a lot of treatments, and we did clear a lot of the bacterial infections. But as you said, it is a holistic approach. And I personally found that I was able to keep my condition stable for a couple of years. So I didn't have any further lesions appear in my brain. But then it got to a point where, my body was starting to experience fungal spots again. And I was getting more lesions in my brain. And so it was at that point I said to my naturopath that, is there a diet for candida? And so I went through this whole journey of 4 years working with my naturopath, learning more about my body. And then it got to that point, and she basically sent me the Live Disease Free diet. And it was at that point that she sent that through, and I looked at it and I was like, oh my goodness, this is Pam Bartha's diet. And I took that as a sign to lead me down a new path. And so I'm getting goosebumps just saying this, because it truly, it is these signs. It took me 4 years to get to that point, but it was at that point where I was like, okay, I am now ready to go down this path, and, look forward to experiencing different things and learning about more things with the Live Disease Free program. So I basically enrolled myself into the program in 2021. And again, I need to take a lot of time to process things. So I was very overwhelmed by a lot of the information. And it took me quite some time to feel comfortable with, taking anti-parasite medications or learning about them, or antifungal medications. And it took me a lot of time to process it. But in saying that, I listened to, once I enrolled, I remember, actually, I'm going to take a step back because I'm getting excited about the program itself, but I'm going to take a step back. I remember saying to my husband, oh my goodness, this is Pam's diet. This is a sign. So I immediately enrolled and I had our call with you. And I remember my husband, Anthony, sitting next to me and we were both talking to you. And, you basically asked, what are your whys? What is it that, is driving you to keep on showing up and to be here? Because for me, I was thankfully lucky enough for my symptoms to have resolved from optic neuritis, and I didn't have any symptoms. However, I was still experiencing the brain lesions, and I was still feeling the mental exhaustion of the path that I had been told that would be my prognosis, ending up with a disability. So I was still dealing with all that, yeah, all that. I guess it was really. I'm trying to think of how to explain it. It was so challenging for me. It was just mental exhaustion of using the medications and just not knowing what my life would look like. And so, yes, I remember sitting on the call and, having the conversation with you, and you asked, what are your whys? And I said, I really want to reverse my diagnosis. I want to basically decrease my lesions. I don't want to be on a medication for the rest of my life. I don't want to be a burden on my husband and our families. And I want to live my life well and optimal. And I remember jumping off that call and, we did have conversations about having children. And at that, I had basically shut that out of my life. And because I didn't feel comfortable having children because of what I was told. And um, it got to that point at the end of the conversation. I looked at my husband. I said, "Oh my goodness, we may be able to have a family." And I actually had so much hope. And so, I rolled myself in and I showed up to every single call, Pam. And even though it took me a while to actually start the process, I showed up every single week and I listened to the live Q&As, and I re-listened and I listened to you speaking about, all the different things that we need to be mindful of, which we'll go into a bit further. But, I also listened to you talk about just really empowering yourself to ask questions and to work with your healthcare professionals. And, even if they don't have that knowledge, it is okay. It's okay for you to educate them in what you've learnt as well. And that's how we're going to get, the message across and also create a lot of change and impact in people's lives. So I guess I'd like to come back to you now and just basically say, what were your whys? What were your whys to keep yourself driven and, to show up every single day? Because the reality is, it is about showing up every single day, making conscious decisions every single moment of the day, even when it comes to what you're actually putting in your mouth in terms of food and those sort of things. So yeah, what are your whys?
It was my family for sure, my children, my husband. I wanted to be part of their life. I wanted to enjoy life with them and be a mom. And I didn't want to end up in a wheelchair. That scared the heck out of me. So I could say no to alcohol. I could say no to cheesecake. I could say no to all these things because I could just equate those things for me at that point with a wheelchair. And I'm like, I'm not going to be in a wheelchair. Like that was just a no, absolute no way I was going to do that. So that was my big why, and just my family, my kids and my husband. That
Yeah.
would be it.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think that's so important, for anyone out there that is currently starting their wellness journey. That is something that I think is so important to have huge whys, because it keeps you driven and you're able to show up every single day and know why you're continuously, doing the hard work and basically honoring yourself and doing all the work that needs to be done in order to get yourself well again. And so, Pam, I know that you have studied under so many amazing pioneer doctors, such as Dr. Klinghardt and Dr. Simon Yu, and there are so many that you have mentioned along the way. And I'd really love for you to share some of the research that you have found that has been so beneficial in people actually healing and how they're recovering and why that is happening, basically.
So there are so many wonderful, I call them hero doctors or hero researchers that even though we're not getting a lot of good research in MS, we're still getting some very good research, but it's not getting a lot of attention, unfortunately. So one Dr. Alan McDonald, he's an American pathologist, And he has discovered Borrelia, which is the spirochete that causes Lyme disease in the central nervous system of MS patients and other like Alzheimer's, et cetera. So he does a lot of research on Borrelia, but he also found small roundworms in the central nervous system of every MS subject that he tested. And he found tapeworm larval cysts, so little like sacs or bladders of developing tapeworms in every MS subject in their central nervous system. And in 2 out of the 10, he found developing tapeworms in their central nervous system. So little tapeworms starting to grow in their central nervous system. And then there's so much other research that they've been finding fungus in the central nervous system, even in the nucleus of the brain cells. So there's a big history of not just one type of parasite. And there could be many other bacteria. It's just that Dr. Alan McDonald, his expertise is Borrelia, which is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. And so he found that he used a certain dye that is attracted to the DNA of Borrelia, and it just lit up green. So what we've learned, and some good research coming out of Calgary, Alberta, is that when we have MS or PLS or Parkinson's, when we have these really awful degenerative diseases, we're in a state of dysbiosis, meaning we're really out of balance. So we have too many disease causing microbes and not enough health promoting microbes. And that could be one of the reasons why it has been challenging to find a cure, because there's not just one treatment that will treat bacteria and big worms or tapeworms or flatworms or, and roundworms or protists. You need different treatments, unfortunately, and fungus. So we're just really out of balance. So in recovery, we have to understand that, and we may have to use a few different treatments. And we do still like to use herbs, antimicrobial herbs, as much as possible. But we have found that especially for people that have a little bit more advanced disease, that the parasite drugs and the antifungal drugs can be really helpful also. So we use a combination of parasite drugs fungi are also parasites, but it's like parasite drugs for worms, and sometimes it's roundworms, sometimes it's flatworms, and then treatments for fungi. So there could be different pharmaceutical drugs for that, but also for protists. And then for bacteria, we really prefer the herbs. For treating Lyme disease, I've just seen people that have done a lot of treatment with Lyme literate doctors. I'm not saying that we'll never be there with antibiotics, but I'm just saying that I just haven't seen a lot of good results with only using antibiotics for Lyme disease with people. It can be helpful, but the herbs are great too. So what we found, like Dr. Klinger talks about, if you just use an antibiotic and you have chronic Lyme, it actually makes the spirochete make cysts. So once it sees the antibiotics, it's exposed to the antibiotics, it produces these cysts, which are a dormant form of the bacteria, and they're really difficult to treat. They kind of sit there dormant and then they come to life later on. So that's why he finds that with herbs they don't do that, but maybe a combination for some people. And again, everybody's different depending on how deep and chronic these infections are, but we do really like the herbs for things like bacteria and the smaller parasites.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think there was a lot that was coming to me while you were having, basically sharing what you were. And I think the big thing that stood out for me was, as I mentioned to you, I did a lot of testing around, bacteria. And, I tested positive to Borrelia, and I tested positive to Bartonella and Babesia, and, learned about a lot of the co-infections. And so did a lot of treating around that using traditional Chinese medicine and herbs and that sort of thing. And, it did clear their infections. But one of the things that I also tested was basically I did a lot of stool testing, and that was to see whether I had parasites. So, the idea of having parasites, or just believing that, I could have parasites, was another thing on its own. It wasn't something that I wanted to believe. And we're generally told that, we contract parasites if we've visited a third world country and that sort of thing. So I basically, did some stool testing, and I did that through the general practitioner, and I also did that through my naturopath, and I did a comprehensive stool testing. And with all the testing that I did, everything came back negative. And so, it was like, okay, well, I don't have any parasites, it's more the bacteria. And so that's what I treated. But then when I started the Live Disease Free program, I learnt more about, parasites, and learnt more about the fact that you can actually pick them up from a lot of places, not just in third world countries. And I started using the oxidizing agent that you recommend in the program, and I started doing enemas. So, again, that was another experience in its own. It's not something that I had planned to do or thought I would be able to do. I didn't know whether I was able to do it. And I'm so proud of myself because I, basically learned how to actually do enemas at home and also use these oxidizing agent. And I remember when I first started using the enemas and the oxidizing agent, I did my enemas and I actually had dead worms leaving my body. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, I've done these tests and nothing has presented. However, there are worms leaving my body. And I remember calling out to my husband, and, in the program, you teach us to actually, look at our stool and look at what is presenting in the stool. So, this was a whole new experience. And, I did feel unwell doing it to begin with. But at the same time, I was calling out to my husband and going, oh my God, you need to come and have a look at what has come out. Like, you teach us to, measure and, use a ruler and use gloves. And, it's all, you need to do it in a clean way and, place it on baking paper so you can actually check, the length of the worms and that sort of thing. And I remember my husband going, oh, do I really need to? I'm like, I need you to be my witness because, you look what's coming out of me. And so, we knew that, I was starting my recovery journey by just seeing what was coming out of me because, firstly, I was, starting to feel skeptical about testing because I was like, how can nothing have presented in testing? And, this is actually leaving my body. And it wasn't just one, there were many, many, as I continued to do them and as I continued to do the treatment cycles, the parasite treatment cycles and also the fungal cycles, there was a lot that left my body. And it was actually got to the stage where I actually wanted to look at my stool to see what was coming out and if there was still more there and how long they were and, if it was clearing. And so it got to that stage where I was actually celebrating the fact that these things were leaving my body. And so was my husband. We were like, yes, this is recovery. We know this is, the start of the recovery journey. So, you know, one of the things that I was questioning was like, how can, the parasites not appear in the stool? And I did ask a lot of doctors this, and I would love to get your perspective on this and, why you believe that they wouldn't present in the stool, if that's okay from your perspective. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that they're not going to leave the body in most of them are staying in, right? They don't come out all the time. And unfortunately, our tests are very poor. And the people that are examining the stool, they're not very skilled at that. They're not looking for this. They honestly believe that this is something that would be very rare. It would be just if you were visiting an underdeveloped country. So poor tests, lack of experience. And I think, we've even had one student who sent her stool test to a retired parasitologist. So somebody who would have a little bit more experience and have more time to look. And he gave her a report, no, you've got no parasites. And then she was doing ozone rectal encephalations and she hit a big worm and she sent it back to him and he goes, oh, that's a whipworm. So it's just, they may not be in your stool when you'll find things like bacteria or protists, sometimes entamoeba, blastocystis hominis, and different bacteria, but you're not going to always see the big worms coming out. And the eggs, they're not probably really looking for eggs. Some of these worms can lay 200,000 eggs in a day, but I don't think they're honestly looking for that. They're looking for only specific things.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. I thought that was a huge thing that, a lot of people need to be aware of because, when you do these stool tests and nothing appears, you're like, okay, well, I don't have parasites. But the reality is that you actually may have parasites. And it is also good to do, a parasite protocol, whatever it is, whether it is through obviously the Live Disease Free program, which I am an ambassador of, and I'm a graduate of the actual program itself, and I can't speak highly enough. And I totally recommend everybody, do this program because it is an educational program, and we need to know this information. And I'm looking forward to getting into more of that soon. But the other thing I'd like to chat to you about is lesions, because I know for me that was a huge thing. That was something that I really wanted to stop. And I was basically told that lesions is damaged tissue in the body, in the brain or in the spine, and that we cannot recover from that. And with my experience, I'm so excited to share that my last MRI results, I actually received results that actually showed that my lesions were less conspicuous. And so there was a decrease in my lesions. And I love what you share about lesions. And I really love for you to share that here and basically your perspective on what lesions really are.
I believe that lesions are pockets of inflammation. I'm sure that research would agree with that, that they're pockets of inflammation. And inflammation is the area where your immune system is fighting something. And the main job for our immune system is to fight parasites. So we can think of lesions being like little ulcers in our central nervous system. So we know that in the science, in let's say in the MS world, they don't know what causes lesions. But in the science world, they know that many different parasites cause lesions in the central nervous system. And I don't know why there's a disconnect there. Like I do know why, but it's really awful that there is that disconnect. But it's just like I've done a video and we've got an amazing blog and videos that I share all this research. So when you heal the body, when you heal these parasites, then those ulcers, I call them an ulcer just so people can it makes more sense, right?
Hmm.
That they can heal and just heal over. So I believe that the biggest base camp of the infections is in the gut. A lot of our immune system is there also. And as we really restore balance in the gut, it takes a lot of pressure off of our immune system. And then our immune system is able to deal with infections throughout the body a lot better. But then also some of the treatments that we're using work systemically also. And I think if we could get more and more researchers going in this area, probably just within a very few years, we'd be able to perfect the treatment plans even better than what we have right now, because you'd have so many different researchers working on it with different people that have MS. I don't think it's that hard. We know quite a bit right now. We know that with MS, a lot of MS subjects or patients, they have roundworms for sure. Uh, that's standard. And some of them are very, very small. Some of them end up in the central nervous system. Many have tapeworms or flukes. And I had flukes and I didn't even know. Like I learned about flukes in university many years ago and never thought of them. And then I'm like, what is this thing? And it just keeps coming out, and they can cause a lot of inflammation and pain in your gut and a lot of all kinds of symptoms, a lot like edema, swelling, all kinds of things like that. So those are the bigger ones, but then there's the protists, this very small single cell parasites. So there's so many different types of parasites. Probably the smaller ones cause the lesions in the central nervous system. And with respect to the lesions, it's not just an MS thing. And that's what none of us really know that because we don't study the science. But there are so many diseases that mimic MS. It's crazy. And so they have a really hard time. Like, is this MS or is this migraines or is this a different condition? And so sometimes it takes months, if not years, to get a diagnosis. And there are people that are over 50 that have lesions and don't have any disease. They're just over 50. So what I think is that over time, because in the developed countries, we're not paying attention to parasites and we're not paying attention to our microbiome, and we're on a lot of antibiotics over the course of our life. So we're really out of balance. And so I've shared research where some of these bacteria, they actually produce poisons that will give us not just leaky gut, but leaky brain. So then we end up, in time, the parasites move into our central nervous system and they cause lesions. And those lesions are always centered around a little vessel, around a little blood vessel, which is so fascinating. So they're probably coming in through the blood vessel and there's leaking, the leaky vessel, because that's where the lining of the cells stop. We're not supposed to have infection in the central nervous system. We know it's not a sterile environment, but that blood brain barrier is there to try to keep them out. So it's interesting that lesions are always centered around a little vessel in our central nervous system. And it's almost like they need to feed off of, the blood and what's coming in. But my people that have migraines have lesions, right? And so before it was like, well, with MS, they're more in this part of the brain. And then no, it could be in this part, but this part of the brain. Okay. But it could also be in in the spinal cord too. So like when you do the digging, it's so wishy-washy, the criteria for diagnosing. Yes, lesions that for MS, if you're going to have a diagnosis, it's lesions that change over time and space. So they move around and might flare up here or there over time, and you have more or less of them. But we've been doing this for almost 40 years, and we are not any closer to a cure. The way that we are calling MS an autoimmune disease, and again, that's something that I just talked about. They a lot of researchers will say that MS is an autoimmune disease, but then a lot of other experts say you can't call it an autoimmune disease. I just did a blog post on that, I believe, last week. You can't call it an autoimmune disease because you've never found the autoantigen. So with autoimmune disease, there's part of yourself that the immune system is apparently going after. And they basically believe the immune system is attacking our tissue for no reason. Like it's just gone rogue and it's just attacking your tissue. But the hero doctors that I study under, and what I believe is that there's just an infection there that our standard of care is not identifying. But there could be like damage to the myelin. And so there could be some fragments of myelin floating around. And so you're going to have the cleanup crew of your immune system cleaning that up. But if MS was truly an autoimmune disease, then you wouldn't be able to get over it, right? Because you'd always have those antibodies that are attacking your nerves. It wouldn't matter what you did for your diet. It wouldn't matter how many parasites you killed. Your immune system would be haywire and it would be going after your tissue. And that's not the case. It's once we correct our microbiome well enough, we feel amazing, symptom free, but just better quality of life, greater level of health. So this scenario this paradigm that we're stuck in, it's really good for the MS disease modifying drugs, like to be prescribing them, but it's not serving the people, and people are suffering terribly. They're losing their quality of life. They're losing their independence. They say to me, in tears, like every week I talk to people that are just years and years of pain and agony and suffering and financial suffering. And if they could all be like you, where you caught it early and just get on with your life, like, can you imagine how much money we would save and how like so many people would just be living their life and not going through this misery. So but there's a big battle and it's really hard to get the truth out, unfortunately, but we're just going to keep trying, aren't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is why I love being able to have these conversations. For a long time, it was really challenging trying to actually talk about this information and, really getting people to understand that actually there are other options and that you can heal. And, I'm an example of that and you're an example of that. And, I feel so grateful to be in the position I am at the moment. And I am so grateful that I feel so much energy and that, I've basically taken my life back. And, I'm so passionate about sharing this information and sharing more about the Live Disease Free program because it was a huge, huge part of my journey to wellness. And, when I actually did the program, I learned so many things about my body that I never knew of. And, one of the things was, how I actually became unwell in the first place. And, that symptoms are the body's language. And there are specific symptoms that relate to certain pathogens. And I learned how to support my body and treat well and effectively, and how to use anti-parasite medications and antifungal medications. And I really love for you to share more about the program itself and what people can expect to learn, because I know when I first enrolled and I had access to so much information, which was absolutely amazing. You have a section which is based on topic specific resources, and there was a section on constipation, and there was a section on, oh, I should say there is, because there still is. um what other things were huge for me are the detoxing. And yeah, I'd really love for you to share what people can expect to learn, and yeah, how it actually works, what the live disease free program is.
So we have found that in 90 days, you can implement a lot of it. You can basically start treating and get at least one treatment cycle for the average person. It depends how disabled we are, how much support we have. But basically, the steps are number one, you want to get ready to treat. You don't want to just start treating parasites when you feel terrible. So it's very important to follow the Live Disease Free diet. It helps people to have so many symptom improvements because the parasites love carbohydrates. So as we're decreasing the carbs, then we notice the inflammation starts to go down. People start to have a lot less symptoms. They get really excited. They start to feel a lot better. And that takes a little bit of pressure off the immune system so that when they do start treating, that they'll be able to treat a little more quickly. They'll tolerate the treatments will work better. And then we support the body. So we want to open up the detox pathways, daily bowel movements, drinking enough water, hydration. But the big thing is daily bowel movements and making sure we're sleeping. Because if we don't sleep, and the parasites really cause us to have a hard time falling asleep, we might wake up throughout the night and have a hard time falling back asleep. Sometimes even the bladder issues with MS, like they're getting up multiple times throughout the night. The diet is one of the first symptoms people notice is their bladder really improves with the diet, and then they're sleeping better, and then they feel more rested and they feel happier and more peaceful, and they start to notice things even like spasticity and pain can start to decrease. This is all true just with diet alone. So we want to do this prep phase, the diet and supporting the body, before we start to treat. And then once we're getting at that point where we're ready to treat, this is where we can start to bring in some herbs. We can use the oxidizing agents, even things like raw garlic with our meals. And then we are then getting access to some of the more commonly prescribed parasite drugs, taking samples to like getting a prescription, taking samples to a practitioner that can do energy testing because we don't have good stool tests. So then the practitioner can say, okay, yes, this one, no, not that one, yes, this one. And then we can take that list back to our practitioner and get a prescription for whatever. Like if we have roundworms, then we'll test well for specific parasite drugs, or if we have tapeworms or flukes, it could be different parasite drugs. Maybe we have more mold or candida. So all of those factors will determine what we test well for. And then because we have been working with doctors and with pharmacies, we have a lot of knowledge about kind of like what people tolerate as far as taking, if they test well for 3 to 5 parasite drugs, which is very common when you're really sick, then maybe we help them to build a plan so that they're taking it in a way that they tolerate it. Working, because we don't want anyone having a Herx reaction, right? We want to avoid Herxheimer reactions. So it's very important to bring things in gradually and slowly. And so people can keep working if they're working, or if they're really sick, that they're not just totally incapacitated on the couch kind of thing. So that's all important. And then as we're treating, we do cycles. And I always say it's important to treat at least a couple of cycles past you being symptom free, because we know that the parasites hide their eggs, and larvae can hide in biofilms. We know that some of these roundworms can, again, produce hundreds of thousands of eggs in one day. So they can persist in our body. And so we want to kind of hit them, take a break, hit them again, take a break until we're completely symptom free. If we're not 100% symptom free, maybe we want to get retested, energy test. We don't have to do that often, but we might want to just see if something else is showing up after. It's kind of like taking layers away. And as you decrease some of the bigger parasites, then maybe something else is showing up. But it's so amazing the recovery that people can have by bringing in the parasite drugs. Like, I had no idea, and I've never promised people can walk again, but we're seeing that like at least a few people had like a hand clenched, like a claw, where they could not work their fingers. And one was for 40 years. And then one morning she woke up and her hand was soft and open. And then she could start doing physiotherapy, and people getting rid of their walkers, and people getting rid of their wheelchairs. Sometimes it takes 12 treatment cycles before they can start using crutches, and their ankles, if they have drop foot, where it's just like completely frozen stiff, it becomes supple and they can start to move it again. And of course, they have to build back their muscles because they have been in a wheelchair for a long time. But they start using crutches, they start doing squats and doorways, they start working on their bike. And this is why I'm just so passionate to get this information out, because I'm imploring all the practitioners to learn about this and to start using it in their practice, because there is so much recovery that we can have that we did not know was possible, that we were told that this is permanent damage to the myelin sheath, and it's not. It's still inflammation, and inflammation can be turned around. So that's the exciting news.
Oh, thank you so much, Pan. And all I can say is yes, 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 everything, yes, yes. And I am again an example of that. I've done 3 treatment cycles, and I've already witnessed a decrease in lesions. So for me, I've got a little bit more treating to do, which I would like to do. I am symptom free. However, I am so determined to reverse my diagnosis and get my body to a state where I can continue. I am already there, but I can continue living my life. And if we decide to have a family, go down that path. So once again, I really thank you for sharing this information and for sharing your story. And look, you have answered a lot of the questions that I had for you, and I wanted for you to share some examples of people and some success stories, and you've shared that as well. So thank you so, so much. I would really love to ask you another question, which is, let me see, where shall I go with this? Because there's so much I could talk to you about, and I'm sure we will have so many more conversations. I guess, okay, let's go to, I know for me that one of the challenges was obviously accessing a lot of the pharmaceuticals, so the anti-parasite medications and the antifungal medications. And being in Australia, and also yourself being in Canada, there is a little bit of yeah, it can be a little bit challenging to access these. So I guess for anyone in these countries, or any country that you aren't able to access these, what would your recommendations be around this?
So I think that it's really important to first check with sometimes a general practitioner, because we're finding that there are more general practitioners that are open to this now. So I know the neurologists might find it a bit of a struggle, like they might think that there's no way, but the GPs very often are open, and integrative doctors, like whether it's a functional medicine doctor or a nurse practitioner, somebody who can write prescriptions. And I know in Arizona, the naturopaths can write prescriptions. In British Columbia, Canada, they can write prescriptions. What's really concerning to me is that we're seeing kind of a crackdown where it's getting more difficult to access parasite drugs. And I think what I've heard from one of the hero doctors that I study under, he said that a lot of people are starting to catch wind that parasite drugs are curing cancers. And it's true. There's many, many studies that show that ivermectin and albendazole, and there's fenbendazole, depending, I don't think that just there's one parasite drug that treats all cancers, because it's probably different infections that are causing cancers. But And there's just so much money involved in the cancer industry too. So now they're really getting more strict with accessing treatments and what doctors can do and what naturopaths can do. So I think that there has to be this great awakening, and that's what we're seeing. And I think with this last few years that we've been going through with I'm not going to say what it was, but you know what's happened, that it's really, there's a lot of doctors that are kind of like, I'm not okay with this. Like, I wanted to treat my patients with early treatments and I was discouraged to do that. And I was just told to let people just go to the hospital and, when they're too sick and bad outcomes. And so they're like, okay, there's something really wrong here. So I think that out of that experience and where we're at, that good is going to prevail. But I think that we have a little bit of a battle on our hands right now. And I don't want people to be discouraged because we weren't even using the parasite drugs a few years ago. We didn't know that they were that helpful, but people were going really far with diet and with the oxidizing agent. And we didn't even have the oxidizing agent either. So like our program has been evolving. So just even with the herbs and the oxidizing agent, I continue to study, and I would really love if we didn't have to use the parasite drugs, if we could just, so there's better and better things coming out. But they do have a purpose and they are helpful. There's usually like one over the counter parasite drug in most countries that you can find. And so in the Live Disease Free Academy and the program, what we do is we help people to access practitioners and treatments in different countries. It's a continual evolving story or scenario because things are changing all the time. But I just think it's by the grace of God that we're doing this work. And if He wants us to do this work, He will keep showing us ways to do this work. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Pam. And I must say, for me, I've, been able to access these medications, which has been amazing. And I also work with a general practitioner who is very open-minded and who has, been by my side the whole journey, even though our perspectives are different and, different education as well. But I love the fact that, yeah, she's so open-minded. And so I think if you don't have a practitioner or a general practitioner that is open-minded, it's worth looking for someone that is. And the last question I would like to ask you is basically, what have you invested in or implemented in for your health and wellness that has been well worth it? Out of
there's,
so many things.
yeah. Well, I think it all boils down to my faith in God, I think, because if I didn't have that faith, I don't know that I would have, had the faith that there was for me. This was like in 1988. That was a long time ago. I didn't even have a computer in the house, right? So we had no online. It was so long ago. Like, how would I have ever found that there was an answer? Because I just look and I think, how many people get that opportunity, right? Early on, like you too, right? And so I think for me, like my faith is everything. And I really believe that there's a loving God. And I really, um, by asking, and that's where I get all my peace. But that's where and I think another thing too is just to really believe in your heart that you might not have the answer yet, but there is an answer. There really is an answer. And so I think it was my faith in God that helped me to find the answer, probably quicker than later, and that how important it is to take responsibility for our health. And that's a skill that you'll have for the rest of your life. So, and it's so important because if you don't have your health, it really limits your life, right? And we can still do meaningful things, but it does really take away from many beautiful moments and experiences. And like you said, now you can have a family. Lisa May is pregnant again. So
Oh, that's amazing. Yep.
she's a nurse in that took our program, and she beat multiple sclerosis, and she was also infertile. And we find too that when you treat the parasites, the fertility comes back. And so she was able to beat MS, but also get pregnant. And she had two beautiful girls, and now she's got baby number 3 coming along. So
That is
it's
so
lots of
amazing.
hope. There's lots of hope for people, I would say.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Pam. And look, I am just so grateful again to have come across you and your story, and so grateful that you have taken this time to have this conversation with me. You are an absolute inspiration and have changed my life, which I'm so grateful for. I feel so emotional every time I talk to you because, like, honestly, looking at your book back then, like laying in bed and now actually being able to talk to you and, watching your videos. So yeah, for everybody out there, Pam has so many videos on the Live Disease Free website and YouTube channel. And I will link Pam's free training video in the show notes as well. So you can go and have a look at Pam's resources. I strongly encourage you do, even if you don't have a diagnosis. I truly believe, we believe that we are healthy individuals, but unfortunately, there's so many things that truly affect us, from our environment, and it is so important to really look after your health and wellness every single day. So, Pam, thank you once again. It has been a true pleasure. Just thank you so much.
And thank you for the work that you're doing, Morella. It was such an honor to work with you. You have such a beautiful heart. Like, you're just radiantly beautiful. And I know that you're going to really impact thousands of people all over the world.
Oh, thank you so much, Pam. So much gratitude and love for you. Thank you very, very much. Thanks for listening to this episode. Life is all about the choices we make. You can choose to take control and look after your health and wellness. Choose to love, choose to surround yourself with amazing people, choose to be grateful, and choose to be mindful and kind, as you never know what someone else may be going through. Choose to live a beautiful life. Remember, the choice is always yours. Has this episode planted a seed or sparked some curiosity in you? Let's keep the conversation going. Join our @wellworthit.podcast Instagram community page, or stay in touch via my personal page @morella.petrucci, and be the first to know about new holistic offerings I have coming up. Also, please show some love by rating and reviewing this podcast on your favorite listening app. To your health and wellness. Until next time.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.